I received some vaccines when I was in the military. I was a young man when I signed up, and I took what they told me to take, trusting that it was going to be safe. Turned out it wasn't. It was still experimental. It was the anthrax vaccine. And what it did is, unbeknown to me, it caused autoimmune diseases to develop in my body. And over the years, particular one of those diseases, it eats away at the healthy tissue and causes it to turn into scar tissue, which affected all of my organs, particularly my heart. So, as we know with the heart, it's got to be supple, it's got to pump, it's got to beat at the right beat, the right pace. With the scar tissue, and particularly the amount that I had, my heart wasn't able to work properly. Quite suddenly, I started having high arrhythmia of my heart, so they call it tachycardia. And I don't need to go into all the medical stuff, but it just caused me to be in end stage heart failure for about 2.5 years. A half a year after I've had my first experience with coming very close to dying, my heart rate had been at over 300 beats per minute, and I've had to be shocked out of it and try to get my heart rate to get lower. But I went into another one of those heart events, and I had been through the emergency room so many times. I knew the procedure at this point. For 5 months, almost 6 months, I've been dealing with this, and I was so close to death that many of the doctors went all over the country trying to find doctors that would be able to help me, and nobody was able to. They told us just to focus on quality of life, not quantity, because it was getting very close to where I wouldn't be around much longer. And so this next one that I had, which is the one that ended up going to my actual death, I was in the ER for about 7 hours, and I knew that this one was different. They make you wait there before they move you up to the ICU, and then they can give you a little bit better care, long-term care when you're in the ICU. But the ER, they have to stabilize you enough to be able to transfer you up there. And so for 7 hours, they were trying to stabilize me. Nothing was working, but I kind of looked at that as knowing that I was going to die. It's not a great place to die is in the ER, but I took advantage of the opportunity to really deepen my prayers, because I knew it was coming. There's nothing I could do to stop it. The doctors weren't able to stop it, but it was kind of a blessing to be able to go through the things that I had done and try to reconcile the wrongs that I had done, where sometimes we hold on to these things without even realizing how much damage it does to us as a human being. And so I was doing that, and I did end up getting stabilized enough to where they could move me up to the ICU. And as they were transferring me into the ICU bed from the ER bed, I went into another high rate of arrhythmia. So they hooked me up to everything that they needed to hook me up to, but the arrhythmia wouldn't come down. And so they called in a crash team, which is just like, it's an emergency procedures for somebody who's in the process of dying. But it's chaotic. There's so many doctors and nurses and people coming in there. They don't ask you anything to, can we do this? Can we do that? They just take your body and put it into positions and do whatever they need to do, because they're actively trying to save your life. They had to strap me down to the bed because they're continually shocking me, and they don't want you to fly out of the bed. In this weak of a state I was in, there was nothing I could have done to control myself. But they're pulling me around and kind of just manipulating my body like a puppet master. But I was really having a tough time praying now. It was so chaotic. It was loud, so much movement, so many people talking to each other. There was one person who was talking to me. It was one nurse who was trying to keep me calm, keep me present in the situation. But that was the only voice that was actually answering my questions, was talking to me. But everything was going on all around me. And at the foot of the bed, there was a crucifix on the wall. And that's when I just focused on that, and I just started praying. I asked God to help me through this. I'm not one of those people who gives up. I have never given up on anything in my life. I loved rough, hard sports like mixed martial arts and boxing and football, and I liked a challenge. I liked that kind of activity. That's why I became a soldier. But this time I gave up. It was so painful, and just that fear that kind of goes into such an experience. It was something I never was dealing with in my life. I was able to overcome those kinds of terrors, and really, maybe out of stupidity, but honestly, my psyche was that I'm gonna overcome it. I'm not gonna be afraid of challenges. But this time it was different. I remember praying that, God, just take me now. I've had enough. I can't deal with this pain. It's been 5 months, almost 6 months. I just wanted to be done. And I closed my eyes, and I told the doctors that I didn't want to talk anymore, that was it. And I just asked God, I said, please just take me now. And as soon as I said that, it was like this intense, it was super painful, like more painful than before, but it was so short that the pain, I don't even remember that pain. I do remember the long-term pain. I just remember that there was just this sudden surge of pain, but it was, again, so quick. But there was a shake and a pop, and I exited my body. So my soul left my body, and the doctors ended up telling me afterwards that I died for a little over 10 minutes. So I'm in this dark void, like a tunnel, like this. I don't really know how to describe it, as because it's nothing like we see in the world, but it was like a tunnel or a portal, but it was staring off into this dark void, and this dark void was similar to what you would think of as outer space. We've seen pictures of outer space. We know what it looks like. Except imagine no luminous. There's no sun, no moon, no stars, nothing like that you could gather any kind of light from. But this enormous, immense vastness that space would contain. And I'm looking at it, and I'm feeling this surge of joy and peace and love that's just flowing into me. And yet I'm staring at this emptiness that was devoid of any kind of love or peace or joy. It was just a cold, dark emptiness. And the chaos from the noise and the commotion in the hospital room was gone. So this was a wonderful feeling, just complete silence with love and peace and joy. It was wonderful. But I was looking at that darkness and that emptiness, and I just remember thinking, this can't be it. This can't be all that there is. I knew the love and the joy wasn't coming from this darkness, but I didn't even want to feel that love and joy without the closeness of God. It felt like when I was praying, and that bit of calmness, when I saw that crucifix, that calmness that came over me to allow me to even contemplate dying. I was afraid before that. Now I'm able to pray in the chaos around me. I felt like this was such an increase upon that. Like, just a wonderful exemplification of this love and this peace. And I just wanted to be, have God, be with him. And that's when I realized that not only could I see this darkness and the depth of it, the vastness of it, but I could see into it. And obviously we can't see into something without light. And I realized that there was light behind me. Just the brightest, shiniest, the most resplendent light you could ever imagine. And I could see it while I'm also looking into the dark void. So I'm able to see in 360 degrees. I could see everything around me. But what was really interesting about this is what I focused on was what I'm able to remember. So even throughout my whole story, I tell it in a linear fashion. It's as if it was all happening at once. There's really no sense of time. People ask me, how long did this seem like? Well, I know now how long I was dead for, but it seemed as if it was just 1 second, and it seemed as if it was 1,000 years, all at the same time. I have no clue. The way that time worked was so bizarre, but it was comforting too. And so I'm looking at this light, and I don't know why I turned around, because I could see the darkness and I could see the light, but I felt like I just needed to turn for some reason. Maybe it's still part of just how human mind works. But I turned, and as I turned, I could see the darkness behind me. But I didn't look at my body, so I don't know what my body looked like. If I had one at all, I don't know that. But I didn't feel a need to look at my body. So that was something that, I don't know if I had eyes, or if I was just interiorly seeing all of this with my soul. But I see this light, and it's just, it's far away. This light is so far away that, I couldn't calculate what the distance would be. Is it from Earth to the sun? I have no clue, but I could see this light clearly. And I said I wanted to be with the light. And I was there like that. It was amazing. But what was really interesting about this is that I could remember every step that I took to get to the light. So every pace that I went to get there happened all in an instant, yet it would have taken, a lifetime to go that far. So that was really interesting to have that concept of, that's why it goes with that time, how hard it is to put a label on how time works there, is because there's no way it could have logically taken me that short of a span of time to get there, and yet still have taken all those steps that I took. But what was really cool is that I didn't feel any inertia. I didn't feel any kind of wind on my face or anything to give me the impression that I had moved as quickly as I did. But I was there instantly. And so now I'm standing before this light. And like I said, it was the most resplendent light you could ever imagine seeing. It was brighter than the sun by far. So there's really no other thing. What else do I describe that, how bright this is? The sun is pale compared to it. But it was enormous. It was so vast that, I could look up and I could look down, I could look to both sides all at the same time. I didn't have any limitations in how my vision was working. And I could see far. I had saw this light from when I was back near the dark void. And yet I couldn't find the end of this light. That's how enormous it was. I had the impression that I would have never been able to find the end of it, because it just didn't exist. It was the entire immensity of where I was. And so I'm looking at this light, and I'm like, I can't believe that it doesn't hurt my eyes. It was that shocking of how bright this light was. And I all of a sudden knew that this was God. And I don't know that it was like his body. I didn't see a physical body or anything like that. I just saw the light, but I could feel the love emanating from this light. It was palpable. It was sinking into my soul. And as I'm looking at this, I literally could have stayed there for all of eternity just looking at that light, and I would have been totally happy. People often talk about, well, you're going to do all these things in heaven. It's going to have this, it's going to have that. And I'm like, I would have just stayed there looking at that light. That's how much joy and peace that I felt. Nothing in life can compare to that. And yet we often will say, well, we're going to eat and drink and be merry and have all these dances and blah, blah, blah. We're coming at it from what we crave as human beings here. But there, just to look at the beauty and the magnificence of God was enough for me. And yet that wasn't all that he had to offer me. It got even more amazing, because when I had that recognition that this is God, that's when he said that I could come into the light. So of course I went right in. And as I went into the light, it was as if the love and the peace and the joy rushed into me even more forcefully. It didn't force itself upon me, but it was powerful. It was just gripping in how powerful this love was. And with every second, it was increasing my capacity to experience and to feel that love. It was as if, you go into a river, and it's a really, really raging river. It's high, the water's full and it's rushing through. And, we've all seen rivers like that, and they're quite terrifying at times if you were trapped in it. But I wasn't terrified at all of this particular river, because it was a river of love and it was coming into me. The only thing I can use to describe this is we all have drank from a straw. And so we've got the fluid in the bottom of a cup, and you're drinking through the straw. It goes into your mouth, but it goes into the straw and it stays full. The straw is full as long as you're drinking from it. Yet it's never the same fluid. It's always new. It's always fresh. So that's how it was with this love. Is it wasn't the same love cycling into me. It was new, fresh love that would never be exhausted. There was no way I could have ever come to the end of this love. And I instantly knew that that was because God is infinite. And I would always be experiencing his love fresh and new as long as I was there. It was mind-blowing and so comforting, to think that God loved me like that. It was amazing, because I think, as much as I had loved God prior to my dying, there was a lot more love I had for myself, but I didn't even love myself as much as God loved me. And I don't think that there's any way to love anything as much as I was being loved right now. All the things that I had been through in the hospital room leading up to it, all the suffering that I had gone through was all being mended, and I didn't even care about it. It was as if I wouldn't have experienced the height of his love had I not had something to compare it to, and all that hurtness, all that brokenness, all the suffering that I had gone through was being healed and broken, or the broken places were being healed, that I was feeling as if they were just being shaved off and replaced with love. And it was amazing. It was amazing to have that kind of transformation. And, I think that one of the greatest things of this experience was that stayed with me. Having been in the service and doing things that I've done in my life that have caused, memories that you don't often shake very easily, things that kind of carry with you. The suffering that I had gone through with medically, just being so vulnerable and knowing that death was going to come. Those kinds of things, often people have a hard time getting over them. That was gone. There was no remembrance of it there. It was as if those became happy memories to a point. Not that they're happy, but you get my point, is that they didn't have power over me any longer. And that stayed with me when I came back. I still don't have any issues with it. And to me, that's amazing. But as I'm feeling this love, I said I wanted to see Jesus. And that's when this light opened up. So I had been walking for who knows how long through this light, but it opened up into this great room. This was bigger than that dark void. So it was so immense. And yet I had a very clear understanding that this was not all of what I was going to experience in heaven. This was not the end point of heaven. It was more of an entry room, kind of, you walk into a hotel room and you got the lobby sitting there and you check in, you do all this stuff. It's almost like that. It has that kind of a feel to it where it's just the greeting area. And in this area, there were countless beings, so many different beings. They all had a torso of a human being, but they didn't have the features. It was just bright lights in each one of them, and varying degrees of lights, but just beautiful lights in every single one of these torsos. And one in the middle in particular was so bright, bright as the light that was now surrounding us. So imagine when that light opened up, it kind of stayed in like a dome. So the light was still around this entire room that I was in, but it was now I was able to see everything that was in this room. And that light was the same degree of intensity as this being that was in the center of all the other beings. And I knew immediately it was Jesus. I didn't have to have him introduce himself. My intelligence had immediately increased to such a point that I had all of my memories, all of the ideas or thoughts that I've ever had in my entire life, all present at the same moment and not being confusing. So that's pretty amazing in and of itself to be able to think about that. Often we forget so many things in our lives that that we just can't have the capacity to have access to all that. Well, there I could, and it wasn't confusing. It wasn't overwhelming. It was able to focus on whatever I wanted and still have the other stuff in the periphery readily available at any point. But I didn't have to have him say, "Hey, Brian, here I am. This is me. It's Jesus." It was clear who he was and where or why it was him, versus the other people were not nearly as bright. They didn't have this draw as he did. His love was the same love as that light that was surrounding us. And that's when, I said I wanted to see his face, because it was just bright lights. His whole body was. And his face came together, but what's really amazing is then all the other beings did too. So I was able to see who was there. And I was able to see that they were all people, and there was, angels. There was just an enormous amount of people in this crowd. But as Jesus' face came together, I wasn't able to lay down the memory of what his face looks like. So when people ask me, well, does he look like this painting that this person did? Or does he look like this picture? And like, well, yeah, but I don't know if that's how he really looks, because I can't remember that. I could remember his eyes and how he was smiling at me. I could remember the love that was just shining from his face when he was looking at me. The look that he gave me was just so full of love. But even when I was there, the only thing I could remember was that light. And that light was so bright. It was just beautiful. But there was just no way that my brain could remember what his face looked like even there. It's kind of like when you look at one of those little animation books, people draw a little animation, they flip it, and it looks like it's moving or doing some kind of activity, because each page has somewhat of an advancement of the previous page. And that's kind of what it was like, is that as soon as I was taking in his features and what he was looking like, it was immediately going into my brain as only that light, and I was losing what I actually was seeing. But that was still beautiful, because I got to see him looking at me with this love, like he just loved me no matter what. And that he loves, I couldn't believe how much he loved me. That it was something that we always think that he does, but it's totally different to know that he loves me, because what we also were doing was reviewing my life. So we're going over the things that I had done and had not done, and things I should have done that I refused to do, or just neglected because of being nervous or fearful or not wanting to have the consequences of something. The things that we went over, that a lot of it I had confessed in the hospital room when I was in the ER, and I was going through all those things that I had done wrong. I was really sorry for those things. But those are things that we can often remember and say, I really wish I wouldn't have done that. I wish I would have made a better decision. We've all done those things in our life, and we really know that we're sorry for those things. But there were things that I didn't do, and things that I justified, things that I said, this person did this to me, so they deserve me to be cold or to give this reaction to them. And instead of holding myself to a higher standard and still doing what was right, I would lower myself to getting revenge, or to letting that person then suffer with the consequences of their decision, because it hurt me. And I could see how that was hurting Jesus. That all those things that I wasn't able to forgive somebody, that I wasn't brave enough to stand up for somebody, or just because I didn't like somebody, I wouldn't stand up for them. Even though I knew it was wrong what was happening. That was a horrible feeling to know that hurt Jesus, and just because of my neglect, because of my unwillingness to do something that I usually would be willing to do, and it was because of some stupid reason that I didn't care for that person. And yet he was looking at me with love, and he smiled at me. It was clear that he was forgiving me, but he was, it was beautiful with how he was showing me how I didn't like that either. that, the justifications were gone. I didn't have temptations to, be successful or to get anything, because there was nothing to gain there like we do in life. So all the justifications fall away. This was just a purity of seeing truth. And I just realized how love he's giving to me, I neglected to give that back. I lived my life in a way that wasn't as loving as I should have been or even could have been. And wow, that was a real eye opener. It really changed a lot in me, because I saw how much it hurt him and offended him that I wasn't giving love. It was just really eye opening to see that. And so as we're going through all those things, I had this memory of when I was probably 5 or 6 years old, and my great grandmother had died. We went to another state, so we had to go down for the funeral and then drive back that night. And I remember all my aunts and uncles and everybody in the family loved my great grandmother. She was just a wonderful person. But everybody was crying. People I'd never seen cry. A lot of veterans in my family, and these are tough guys. They don't cry, but they love great grandma, right? So they cried, and I just remember that, and I didn't want people to suffer over my death. I was just a little kid, but I loved my family, and I didn't want them to feel like that over my death. So when I got home, I got on my knees, and this is the first time I ever remember getting on my knees as a little kid, praying, and I prayed for at least an hour, maybe longer. I just all of a sudden got this feeling, though, like my prayer had been answered. And I never thought about that ever again until this moment. I had completely forgotten that prayer. But as I'm looking at Jesus, I'm like, well, I thought you answered that prayer, that you were going to give me a long life. And, I think I was 41 or 42 when this happened. So I didn't consider that to be a long life. I considered that, be just a pretty short life in all actuality. But yet he affirmed that he did answer that prayer of my childhood, and that he was still going to grant me a long life. But what was so amazing about this was that while it does benefit my family, because many of them are still alive, my aunts and uncles, and everybody's still living, but it wasn't just for them. I had 3 small children at the time of my death. I had a wife. I had, my own family, and he was showing me how he was actually answering that prayer in advance for what I was going to have at the time of my death. It was amazing how his providence is so profound. It's kind of like playing chess with a master chess player versus a 1-year-old. He's like 50 moves or more ahead. It's not even a challenge for him. And that's what it was like, is that he had that plan for me, for my family, that opportunity for me to continue to have a long life. But this is what he asked me, is that he said, but why would you want to go back? And I got to be honest, I'm loving being here. I didn't want to go back. There was no reason for me to go back, and I was really racking my head trying to figure out how to go back or why I should. And I thought, well, my kids, they need me. He was just showing me how he had planned that out for me, so it was available. But that wasn't the right answer. He showed me how much he loves them, which far exceeds how much I love them. He loves us all the same way. He loves every person, and I knew that was true because I could feel how much he loved me, despite all the things that we had just went through about my life that I had done. And so I knew that he was going to take care of my kids, that was going to be just nothing that I could do would really be that beneficial as what he will do for them. For goodness sakes, he answered my prayer in advance from when I was 5. I mean, it's pretty amazing to think about that love that he has. But I realized what the real reason for going back is how I felt. I felt like his love was so undeservingly given to me, but it was so real, so pure, that I wanted to go back and share it with other people. I wanted to go back and undo, not necessarily undo the things that I failed to do, and the times I didn't stand up for people and I didn't do the right things. I just wanted to live a life different than that. That I always did the right thing. I always sought truth. That I would always give love to other people. That I wouldn't give them that the selfishness and the hatred and the anger, all the things that we can fall into as human beings. I didn't want to do that. I wanted to be a reflection of his love. And so when I had that realization, that's when he said that I could go back. But as I said before, all this was happening kind of at once. So again, I'm going to try to explain the time thing. It's like like a small little dot. If you take a pen, on a piece of paper, and you put a little dot down, that's kind of like how space or time was happening there. It's like everything was there, mixed into that little spot. And so I still have to tell the story in a linear fashion because as a human being, my brain doesn't work in any other way. So I couldn't just tell you it all at once. Plus, that would be too many words to try to even begin to say at the same time. But what he did is, during this experience, particularly reviewing my whole life, is he showed me 3 things that I need to do. Now, these 3 things were very specific for me, but I do think they apply to everybody as a whole. And then the first one was that I needed to pray more. And, I would pray. I prayed a lot of different types of prayers, but I wasn't living a life of prayer. And when we're in a relationship with somebody, we're always trying to increase that relationship's bond, but often God was being neglected in my life. I would maybe say morning prayer, and then I'd go about my day and do things, but I wouldn't come back to remembering him and to do things for him. And that's how different this experience made me, is that I realized that if I wanted to go back and share his love, I had to do it in connection with him. I couldn't possibly begin to do it on my own, because I'll go back to the same patterns that I had done. But it's so simple as just every task that I do, doing it, remembering that God's there watching me, that he's with me, that he's everywhere and sees everything, that I'm not just doing this menial task because it's got to be done. I'm doing it because of love for God. So if I see something silly, like a piece of trash, we often don't even think about a piece of trash, but if we see it on the ground, then so will other people. If I pick up that piece of trash, and now nobody else has to see it, it's gone. I've taken it out of there, it doesn't belong, and I moved it. And doing something so simple can be an act of prayer if we're doing it for the right reason. If I'm doing it to be able to clean up, to share something beautiful which God created, versus something that we just littered about because we were careless as human beings, that can be a prayer. It's that simple, of living our life in a way that's organized and dedicated to doing what's right, to doing what's good for God. I just found that to be so enlightening, because sometimes we find it hard to pray. We're like, well, I don't know what to say. I don't know what right things to say that is going to, move God's heart. We get way too overcomplicated with the things that we think about with God. And instead of just lifting our hearts up to him, just letting him use us in ways that may seem very simple, but can be profound because of the impact it has on another. We just don't know how he's going to work it, but we got to have trust. And so then he moved into the next part, which was how I needed to suffer joyfully. And that's a really tough one, because as human beings, we often try to avoid suffering. We'll do anything to get out of it. And, if whether it's a mental suffering or a physical suffering, we'll try everything. We'll go to doctors and we'll try to seek out answers and try all these treatments, often which, in my situation, caused even more suffering, just to try to avoid the one suffering. So we're trying all these things, but we'll rack our brains trying to figure out how to get out from underneath of suffering. And we miss the point of it sometimes. The thing with life is that anything that's worth doing is going to cause some suffering. If you're going to go to college, you're going to have to probably have a few sleepless nights where you're going to study. You're going to sit in some boring classes. You're going to have to listen to somebody who maybe is great, Or you might get somebody who couldn't make it in any other field, and so they decided to teach it. And yet you still have to go through that, and you find it to be so tedious at times. Or if you have a desire to have a home and food on the table and clothes, you might have to go to work, and you might have to work a job you don't like. And that can be a suffering. Or you might get something like what I had to go through, something physical that you didn't ask for. In fact, you were trying to do something good, and it just happens to you because they force you to take this vaccine, and yet here you are with this physical pain and suffering that you can't get out of. You can't do anything to change it. But what we can do is we can offer that up to the God, and we can say, let me apply this to your suffering, which you went through creating me. You didn't have to come down and die for me, and yet you did. If I can put my suffering to that, how amazing can my life be that I can help other people with my suffering? It doesn't have to be for nothing. I mean, when it's for nothing, it's terrible. It's absolutely terrible. But what I found was that my first half, that 5.5 months, it was terrible suffering because I did not apply it to God. I did not give it to Him and say, you do something with this. I can't do anything with it. If I have to live it, I might as well use it. I didn't say anything like that. But the rest of the time that I went, which was another 2 years, was amazing to be able to offer that up every time to God. And that was because the way He showed me that suffering is never wasted. It's always got a purpose to it. He loved me. I can keep going on and on about it because it's just amazing that how much He loved me. But to know that He loves me that much, He would never have let me go through suffering unless it was beneficial to me. It gave me strength in a way that I could never have gotten on my own, particularly if my life had never had any kind of complications or any kind of adversity. I would never have grown in the way that I have because of this experience. And there's joy in that. There's joy in that kind of suffering. And so then the last one, I've kind of already spilled it open, but was to share His love. And that was the reason I obviously was able to come back. But it was because of how much He loved me that I wanted to go back and share that love with other people. I didn't want people to, I had lived my life with questions too. I had tried to not believe in God. It was something that got in the way when I was a young man of things that I wanted to do. And, you feel your conscience kick in when you know you're doing something that isn't right. And it's a lot easier if you don't believe in God, so you try to tell yourself all kinds of things. But there are people who've never heard about God. There are people who just have so many questions because we can't see Him. We can't understand how He acts in our lives. And that's a really sad thing when you think about it. When I could see how much He loves us and somebody's missing that. And often I think what we miss it from is that we don't share that love with each other. We can be so cruel to each other. And I know I had been guilty of doing things that were cruel, things that were not beneficial for others. And I knew that coming back, sharing His love was a way for me to act in His love. And that was a beautiful thing, to be able to know that I could do some of the work for God out of pure love. I mean, what an amazing thing. So He says that I need to go back now. Now, this was the last I saw of Jesus. So as soon as my decision was made, that was it. I got to go back. And so I didn't see Him anymore. It was back into the light. And I had to go back the exact same way that I had come in. And the only time that I felt any kind of discomfort when I was in heaven was this point. It was like walking through concrete, just really hard, wet, thick concrete that wasn't fully formed yet, but was just enough that it was, better analogy would be walking through a muddy bottomed water, where it's really thick, deep mud. It takes every effort to try to lift your legs to get through to the next step. That's what it was like, every step walking away from God. It was as if my soul said, I belong here, not where you're going, wanted to stay. And yet I had to will myself to go back. I had to keep going. That I was going to share God's love, that I was going to do something good with my life, that was a good reason to leave such a wonderful place, knowing that I'm going to go back to a body that's riddled with pain, that's barely surviving, that I'm going to have to go back to this body that is not desirable. It was something that I had just left saying, please, I can't take it anymore. Take me, and now I'm going to go back to this body. And my soul was like, hey, this is not what we want to do, but we do. We're going to do it. And I kept going and I kept going. And as I got to that tunnel, back where that dark void was no longer the dark void. That was my hospital bedroom or bed with me laying on it, all the doctors and nurses working on me. And I'm looking at what's going on there, and I really had this realization that when I came, I had nothing. I brought nothing. I brought emptiness to heaven with me. I brought that dark void, nothing of value. And I'm going back to this life, and I didn't want to live my life in the same manner as I had before. I wanted to live it in a way that would be that reflection of God. And so I'm going back to my body, and I see, they had this machine on me. It was called a Lucas machine, does chest compressions. Ended up breaking several of my ribs because, it's pretty forceful. So I'm going to go back to this body that has a weak heart, broken ribs, can't breathe, all these problems. And I snap into my body. And as soon as I snapped into my body, it was as if that portal closed, that tunnel closed off because of all the distractions that life brings in. That pain from the broken ribs. I could feel it. I could feel my heart and how bad of shape it was in. That came right back. All the noise, all the chaos, all the wonderings of how much longer am I going to live? Am I going to die again and have to go back? And what's going to happen? All that stuff came immediately back. But that portal really wasn't closed. It was closed in a way that as human beings, we get distractions. We have a lot of things that take our minds off of what's really and truly important, which is our next life. When we die, which we all will, what's going to happen to us? And that's what it was doing, is that I could feel that God was still with me, that from his end, that portal's open. But from my end, I have to deal with things of life. And now I realize that I have to have a balance point. That's where that praying more is such an important piece of this, particularly when you're suffering, and if you're not suffering joyfully, you're going to be suffering and focusing on all the pain. And that was such a beautiful part of this experience, because with all the pain that I had, that ecstasy of my experience stayed with me. So they had to go in and they had to put in a new pacemaker, defibrillator, and they have to go in through here and then put the wires down in your heart. Didn't bother me at all. I was so enamored with the feelings of ecstasy that I had experienced, that was staying with me. It stayed with me for at least a month. That I just felt this overwhelming peace and love. I mean, people could have robbed me, and I would have been like, "Oh, here's my money. Don't worry about it. I love you," and blah blah. I'm not quite like that anymore. I'm still a realist. We have to live in life, and I realize that's not good for a person to rob somebody else. So I'm probably going to still stop them. But at that time, I was so full of love that you could have taken my good organs and given it to somebody else. That's how generous I would have been. And it was because of that experience of God touching me in such a way that changed everything about my life. Now, I had to suffer, like I said, for another 2 years in this state. So I was going in and out of the hospital constantly. My heart was so bad that finally one of my doctors, who I did trust, I asked her, I said, how much longer am I going to have to live? And, just don't sugarcoat it to me. I'd rather know the truth. I don't want to have this misconception that I'm going to be fine, and I'm really not. She looked at me, she goes, "We're going to fight this, but it's not looking good." She didn't give me an exact time, but she told me it wasn't going to be long. And, her advice to go and get a heart transplant was something that I had not wanted to do for quite a while. I knew that was already something she said that we needed to explore, but she was very patient with me, because I had this experience and I thought God was going to give me a new heart. I really did think that. Turns out that he wanted to give me somebody else's new heart, which in and of itself is such an amazing part of the story. But what was really interesting was that when they took my heart out so 2 years I lived with this heart, that when they took it out, they said there is no way this heart could have been functioning. They pointed out 4 or 5 different places on my heart that were so damaged from the scar tissue that if any one of those places was as damaged as it was, that heart would not work and the person would be dead. And so the doctors are so amazed. They take it around and they're still teaching other doctors at different conferences and things that doctors like to go around and teach. Hey, we saw this guy's heart. You got to check it out. They're using that as an example to teach other doctors about my disease and how damaging it can be. But a guy who lived for 2 years with that heart, after having already died. So I realized that God had my heart in his hand that whole time. And I could go on and on about the different things that I came so close to dying, even with the heart transplant. They kept turning down hearts because, I was on the list for a total of 4 months, I think. I had to go down to Phoenix because in Minnesota, there's just not enough people to draw, for donations. Because you have to have a 4-hour window. So the heart or whatever organ you're getting has to be 4 hours away to get it from the donor person to the recipient person. And there's just not a lot of people to draw from up in Minnesota. So I went down to Phoenix, got it down there. It only took 2 months. They said when they took my heart out that I would have gotten the very next heart anywhere because of how bad my heart was. But they said that, we didn't know that your heart was as bad. I was really low on the list, which was good because I was on, I think, the second tier. But they said I would have been on the very first tier at first heart because of how bad my heart really was. And yet, they kept turning down hearts, saying that, this just wasn't a good fit. It wasn't going to be, the perfect heart. We really don't, want to give you a heart that's not going to be perfect for you. And I remember telling my transplant nurse the week that I ended up getting the heart, but it was this day that I got the told that they turned down another heart. I said, don't turn down the next one because I'm not going to make it to the end of the week. And, I think this was a Tuesday. And so that day I went home or to hospice care. I was staying in hospice care, but I had to have my mom take care of me because my kids were in school and we didn't want to disrupt because you can only have one person there. So we had to have somebody with my kids. And of course, my wife had to be with my kids. And so I told my mom, tell my wife this, tell each one of the kids this, I don't know if I'm going to make it up from this nap. That's how bad it was. I was really close to dying again. And, I know maybe he would have let me come back, but I wasn't feeling like that was going to be another experience I was going to get. And so I told her to say all these things. And, I said a prayer to St. Jude, which is a prayer for impossible cases. It's a really beautiful prayer, but I said this prayer the first time I had ever said it, but I went to sleep and I wake up to the phone call and it's my transplant nurse saying, Brian, you got to get in here right now. We got a great heart. So I ended up getting the heart the very next day. And that happened to be Ash Wednesday. So it was like all these different things where God was just showing me that he was with me throughout this whole process. And I could keep going on and on about all the different connections that he did, but it was always a way of showing me that he was with me, that I wasn't alone, because often in those situations you feel so alone and we get focused on these negative things and we forget to focus on the positives because they don't seem to be as apparent as those negative things are. And yet, man, I look back on that so fondly of that time, which was extreme suffering, because I can see how God was so caring and so loving through it all. It was just amazing. And if you have any questions, feel free to ask.
Oh my God, so many. But to be honest, I was just so taken aback and impressed, by everything you've said. And, one of the things that definitely jumped out at me was suffering joyfully. And those are two words that we would never put together, suffering and joy. You're either suffering or you're enjoying something. And just hearing, even, in the last part when you were waiting for a new heart, and I can even imagine, after you died and came back to your body with several organs failing, you could feel all of the pain. You've mentioned your ribcage, but I can imagine the months and the years that followed. Even though you made it, it was almost barely what we call now a life, right? It was filled with pain, with a lot of inconvenience. So I think there's two ways you can look at, that kind of a situation. The first one would be, why is this happening to me? Why would a loving God that I was just there, I saw how much he loved me, why would he do that to me? Why would he let me suffer? And then the other way of looking at it was, everything is happening for me, and when the time is right, I will get a new heart and he will take care of me. And I think very often we fall into that first category of people that are thinking, why have I been laid off at my work, or why do I have to suffer with this disease? Why is this happening to me? As opposed to, it needs to happen for a greater purpose that I may not know or understand at this time, but I need to have faith that there is a greater plan and this fits into that. So could you talk a bit more about what it took of you to take, I would call it the high road? So the part of this is happening to me, it will fall into place, and God will take care of myself or of my family in case I will not make it.
Yeah, I agree with everything you said. It is so easy to wonder why something's happening to us, because it's very personal. We're experiencing it, so we feel very personally involved in it. And I had those feelings right away when I first had my heart issues come up. I was like, why is this happening to me? I was a guy who's, I used to lift weights. I was running marathons. I was really good shape. So this was a surprise to have this happen. In fact, just a month and a half before I had my first heart event, I jumped out of an airplane for the first time, and didn't seem to have any issues with my heart at that point. And all of a sudden, I'm in this situation, and so I'm thinking, wow, why is this happening to me? And I miss so much. I miss so many things focusing on that, because life still goes on. There's still a lot of value to life. And, something that really sticks out to me is that sometimes I think for God, if he jumped in right away and would have done all this, just healed me, I would have took credit for it myself. I said, well, I was in good shape. I took care of myself. I didn't, smoke. I didn't drink much. I didn't do, all these bad things. I ate healthy. I worked out. I would have given myself credit for having saved myself. I would have found a way to make that be my success. And I think we do that in life a lot. I think we often will neglect things. So one of the aspects is that, God does it in perfect timing. Sometimes there's a person like me who needs to be brought down to realize that I depend on God as opposed to myself. And then there's other times that people who I think, having seen a lot of people who suffer, I think children are beautiful, the way that they often can handle suffering. I've seen kids who are going through some terrible suffering, and they will be smiling and joyful. Maybe they don't feel like that because they're hurting, but they do it because they don't want their parents to hurt. I mean, can you imagine how much love that takes for a little kid to endure that just to spare their parents? It's beautiful. And I think sometimes God gives us things like that in order to have an impact on somebody else, because while that kid is suffering, so is the parent. The parent is going through an unbearable kind of suffering watching their child in a state like that. And the thing that I come to realize through my own suffering was, we don't know what it is that God has in store, what good he's going to turn that suffering into. And I remember making a prayer that when I finally gave in and I trusted God, I knew he was going to handle it, because after you get through a near death experience and you still have 2 years to live with unbearable suffering. I mean, in fact, it got worse, during those 2 years. Granted, he did tell me that it was going to be bad. So, I mean, that was helpful to have that awareness that it was going to get worse. But I did start to wonder, well, maybe I'm never going to make it out of this. Maybe this is just the way that my life is going to be until the end, and might be coming rather quickly. But it still has value. I'm still a good, valuable person. I'm not just a waste of life to sit here. And I realized that I could share God's love despite how much pain I was in. In fact, maybe even better. Because when you see somebody who's suffering like that, who has unquenchable faith, it's reassuring, and what I realized is that it's not up to me how it's gonna end, how it will be determined. And I just said to God, whatever you're gonna do to turn this to good, I'm gonna leave that to you. I trust you. I know you're gonna do something good with this. I can't see it right now because when we're in the midst of it, it's hard to see how it's gonna turn out for good. And yet now, in hindsight, I can look back and I say, wow, my life is really amazing that I made it through this thing. And now I'm able to help. I'm a psychotherapist, so I work with homeless men who have addictions and many other various types of mental illness and problems with criminal behavior. I mean, sometimes the people that we most want to see locked up, and I'm working with them outside where they're free to go about and still living some of the lives that they've chosen to live. But I find beauty in it that I'm able to touch some of these guys in a way that helps them to start to grow, to start to reject some of the lifestyle choices that they have been making. And I would never have really done something like this because it doesn't pay as well as some of the other areas I could go and work in. And it's quite frustrating sometimes when you have somebody, usually they don't yell at me so much, but I have seen them yell at other therapists. I have seen them get violent with each other. I mean, it's totally different environment than most areas that people with a degree in training like mine will want to work. And yet these guys need it. And I feel myself drawn to sometimes the things that we in society will cast away. And that can only come from the fact that God has worked something in my life through my suffering, through my adversity, to where now I want to just give back. And I got to tell you, when I'm sitting there looking at this and saying, why me? Why me? It's because he knew what he was going to work in me, what he was going to work through me. And that is amazing. Again, that goes back to like that prayer I had when I was a little kid, and he knew he was going to spare my life for my future family. It's like he knew what he was going to do with me. As long as I trusted and allowed him to work in me, I'm helping these guys to have better lives. And the people that they're not victimizing are also having better lives because they're not being victimized by these guys. Things are happening in a way that is far beyond my ability as just Brian, just me being able to contribute is not enough. But working with God, putting that into that prayer, living a life of prayer, amazing what he does with it.
And what I often think when I think of, people that, just very simply put, do bad things, is I tend to think they're so separate of love. And it's something that they've tried so much to connect with, but it's just impossible to see in their environment, that it hurts so much just to exist, that you end up just doing almost whatever to numb that suffering a bit. So it seems to me that it's just a horrendous life, to be honest, to live. And their victims, for sure, they hurt, but I can imagine they would hurt probably much more. And that's the kind of suffering that doesn't really go away.
Yeah, and that's such a truth because, I've really come to learn that, I used to think loving a homeless person was giving them some money. but that often isn't the right thing to do because they're maybe going to continue down that path and use it. And I still do sometimes do that depending on, the situation, but it's up to them what they do with that money. It's up to me if I have it in my pocket, I'm going to go waste it on a $6 coffee, when I could go make my own coffee. Well, why not give a little bit of money to somebody? Hopefully they'll go have a meal. But that's on them what they do with it. It's on me what I don't do. But what I have found more important for sharing love is to look at it as the true definition of charity is to will the good of another. And that takes discernment. That takes us to think about it, to put ourselves in that person's shoes and say, maybe it's because I know that if you go into the guys I work with and you're all sugary sweet, they're going to take advantage of you. They're going to see you as an easy mark and as an easy target. I go in and I just naturally who I am, but I don't put up a barrier thinking, inside myself that I'm better than them. I don't look at it that way. I look at it as I love this person because I know how much God does love them. And if we constantly remind ourselves that God loves that person as much as he loves me, there is no difference in, how good I think I am compared to how bad I think that person is. God still created that person and he knows what they're capable of. He knows what he intends to do with that person if they let him. Well, how do I get that person to think about that, to open themselves up to God? Well, I certainly can't go in there and beat them over the head with how bad they made decisions in their life because that they already know that for the most part. But going in and just treating them like a normal person, treating them as somebody who is loved by God. Wow, that opens their heart. Sometimes they are so shocked by the way that I talk to them. I would just sit there and talk about a sporting event, something that just happened, as if we're two buddies just sitting back talking. It might be a 5-minute conversation, and you will see such a change in the way that the atmosphere around them. When you walk into a room and somebody's really in a bad mood, you don't even have to have them tell you they're in a bad mood. You can almost cut the tension with a knife because you can just feel that anger coming off that person. But when you spend 5 minutes with somebody relating just human to human, with just all the intentions of good for that person, not to gain anything from them, not to get anything out of them, just to be with them, be present with them, and you see that change in how they become more responsive and open, it's amazing. And you know that the next time you have an interaction with them, it's just going to continue. And over time, constantly showing that you have a true, genuine curiosity and love for that person is so much better than just giving them, a couple bucks and maybe sometimes just telling them, hey, don't go waste it on drugs, don't go do this. Well, they're adults. They know what they're going to do, and hearing a lecture isn't always so helpful. But to actually spend that time with somebody, wow, that can be amazing. And that's a way to show a person true love. And it's because we want the best for them. We want them to know that they are better than the lifestyle that they're living.
Which very often I don't think we convey that message. I mean, you're, I think, the first person that I hear talking this way about, people that have not made the best choices in life. I think as a society, we don't look at them as worthy people. So that tends to just fuel that unworthiness that they already feel and confirm the way that they've been acting so far because nobody sees them as any better. So, I mean, you're doing wonderful work. It seems like the most meaningful kind of work that anybody could be doing. One of the things that I wanted to end with was throughout, listening to your experience and to your story, you kept coming back to forgiveness and you kept coming back to, knowing that sometimes we weren't our best selves. We've done things that we maybe shouldn't have done, or we've behaved in a way that was not our most loving self. But I want to bring that in the context of the people that you work with. Because sometimes we were probably angry, we have done things that are a bit unkind, but you tend to work with the people that have done what we would define as the worst things that a human being could do. So how does a person like that find forgiveness? And is it possible in your view for them to forgive themselves and for God to forgive them? And how do you get them to internalize that message?
Yeah, I'll start with how God forgives. He's already come down and died for us. That's a huge thing, and that sacrifice is the ultimate self-love, of giving of love of oneself. To be able to do that, and we all know that anytime we sacrifice for somebody else, do something, give up something of ours because of our love for them, we know we're doing it for love. And that's a beautiful feeling. But when you think about how he can read our hearts, he knows when we're truly sorry for something. He wants to forgive us. He wants nothing more than us to get to a point where we actually are sorry for the things that we do. And I could feel that when I was with him, that everything that I was seeing, everything that I was already sorry for, he had forgiven. I was truly sorry for those things. That was easy. But it was those ones where he was showing me something new about it from an angle that I hadn't ever thought of, that was instantly changing how I took that and perceived that situation. And I became sorry for it, and I was forgiven. That's the beautiful thing about God, is he is so forgiving. His mercy and his love are so great. He does obviously have justice, which is equal, but that justice is overcome by his mercy for those who are forgiven or want forgiveness. If you seek forgiveness, he's going to give it to you. Now, it's harder for us as human beings because we often will question, there's no way God can forgive me for this. I did this thing. We know how guilty we are. But that's part of the beginning of the process of healing, is when we realize that, I really don't deserve forgiveness for this. I'm looking at myself and I'm saying I did something terrible. How beautiful can that be, to realize that I did something terrible versus the person who did that same thing and is happy about it. The person who's happy about it is much further from getting forgiveness because they couldn't care less. It's as if, two siblings, one of them steals the other one's watch. And then they say, you know what, I'm sorry, I stole your watch. But they won't give it back. They're going to keep it. They're just saying that they're sorry. That doesn't really strike a truly genuine contrition to me. It doesn't look like that person's sorry at all. And I think that's how a lot of people will go through their life. They'll say it, but they don't really mean it. But that person who genuinely questions whether they can be forgiven or not is already on that path. Now, it is hard to forgive ourselves, and I think that's something that we have to learn to trust in God, because forgiving ourselves isn't as important as it is to get the forgiveness from God. But we still have to live with the scars of ourselves not forgiving it, and that's something we can work on. But when we trust in God, he can overcome that. If we know that he really has forgiven us, then what do we care what we feel anymore? We can often forgive ourselves for things that we're really not sorry for. And we can justify a lot of things in our minds that we're completely wrong on. I can do this because that person did this to me, and we can get ourselves into a real conundrum there where we think that we're right when in actuality we're still doing something wrong. But if we're starting to look at ourselves and we're having true sorrow for the thing that we did, and we realize that our God is willing to forgive us, that's the key right there. Is we just got to keep on trusting in him and knowing that he will forgive us. If sometimes we can't quite feel it, then we just got to keep asking. That peace will come to us in time, but just not if we bury it. If we go into shame where we want to hide it from everything, we're going to see our lives will turn out often like a lot of the lives of the people that I work with. There's so much shame there, and it's hidden. They don't want to talk about it. They don't want to bring it out. And when they do that, then they tell the opposite thing where, no, I'm proud of what I've done. They're truly, most of the time, they are not proud of it. But that's just a defense mechanism they use to protect themselves from feeling the pain of it.
Absolutely. Now, Brian, it's been so wonderful speaking with you, and I think we could have easily gone for a few more hours, because I think there's so much that we can learn from you and that we can take away and apply into our own lives. What I want to end with is for anybody that wants to connect with you or get in touch, and I also know that you've written a book about your NDE and the learnings that you've taken from it. How can we connect with you and how can we find your book?
Okay. My book, you can find it online, many bookstores. My easiest way to get a hold of me is either tsdismas.com and you can see, I think it shows on the screen there. So, or tsdismas@gmail.com. And then I also have a YouTube channel, The Psychology of Heaven with T.S. Dismas. So if you want to look me up there, you can also message me and get all the information, and I can get a hold of you too. I do try to answer emails as often as I can. And, genuine emails I'm going to get to faster. So usually it's when somebody's suffering, particularly a medical issue that's pretty severe, and they're getting to the end of their life, and they're just naturally have questions. And I really enjoy talking to people through those situations. So I do put that as a priority, and if people are close by, I will go and meet them. So that's something too that I really found beneficial for me. As far as the book, if I do have a copy here, if people want to read it, it tells a little bit more about the suffering. I think that's something that I try to spare on the interviews, just because it can be quite tedious, and some people are a little uncomfortable with such degree of suffering, and other people really like it. I think ultimately the point I like to get across is that despite all that suffering, the profound change that it's had on me is that I don't fear suffering. And the last 2 years of my suffering, where it was really bad before I got my heart transplant, were great times that I have grown so close to God and my spirituality, and close to other people, that without that suffering, I think I would not have experienced it. So I'm quite grateful for it. That's the profound love our God can have, and I just hope people take that away from it.